Hey everyone, welcome back to Research Methods in Composition and Rhetoric. We're in week 2 now. In week 1, we thought a little bit about research we conduct in our day-to-day lives, and we've also talked a little bit about how research is done in the field of composition and rhetoric. In week 2, we're going to start looking at the importance of research questions and the idea of inquiry in the field of composition and rhetoric. And we're going to start thinking about and practicing how we take notes when we are reading for research. If any of that sounds really basic, it's not to talk down to anybody. It's not assuming that you don't know much. It's just one of two things. One, it's tips that I wish I would have had when I was a new graduate student, or it's underscoring the importance of just how important some of these concepts are, particularly research questions. Let's begin first with research questions, just how important those are to the discipline. I love what Blakesley and Fleischer say about research questions in the selection that you're going to read for week 2. On page 17, they talk about the real challenges of posing a good research question, like assuming you don't know enough to ask a good research question. As somebody who has published a little bit in the discipline and tries to keep an active research agenda, I can say for myself, those concerns are like totally the concerns that I have. So like even folks that are accomplished, a little bit accomplished in the discipline or familiar with the discipline or work in the discipline a fair bit, they experience the same anxieties that Blakesley and Fleischer are writing about. So it's not something that's unique just to new graduate students in a program. You'll do yourself a favor, a huge favor, if you think about your research question as something that evolves. The research question you start kicking around in week 2, I would see it as a real problem if that was the same research question that you had in week 14 at the end of the term. The question evolves as your understanding about that phenomena or that topic evolves. In that chapter, I also like the reminders of the things that they talked about in chapter 1 about like what makes good research in the discipline and what are the characteristics of good research in our area, in our discipline. And I took a few notes here. 1, research is guided by a thoughtful question. It matters to yourself and others, so it's something you genuinely care about and others are going to care about. It's carried out in a thoughtful, intentional manner. It engages in multiple sources. It involves a careful recording of information and findings. In short, I'd say of the most important ones there, and I think they listed it as the first one for a reason, is that research in our discipline is really, it centers around asking good questions. And that means you're not doing research about things that you already know about. So it should be something that you genuinely have some curiosity about, or something that you're not sure about, something that might bother you or concern you, and asking a question about those areas. So not asking questions about, you're not asking questions that you could already answer. It's something that you have to do the research to kind of find out for. But where do questions come from? Where can we develop questions for our projects and for our discipline? Well, as a starting point, think about your experience, your interests, your knowledge at this point of the discipline. Pages 19 and 20 of Blakesley and Fleischer, they have some really excellent recommendations about how to generate questions that are relevant to the discipline. And you can think about those questions as extensions of things that you've done in week 1, and you're going to work through some of those questions here in week 2. So a lot of talk about research questions and how to develop a good research question. If you've had classes with me in the past, you've probably heard me talk about the North Star analogy. Your research question is your North Star. So when you get really bogged down in your research and you're only seeing the weeds and you're not seeing the forest, you're not being able to see the whole, you can pick yourself up and say, okay, what is the question I'm trying to answer here? And that centers you. It keeps you grounded. So asking a good research question really does matter. And again, it's going to change. It should change as you learn more about your topic. So don't get too wrapped up in asking the perfect question in week 2, 3, or 4. It's going to take some time. Another important topic that we'll cover this week is how to read for research. And again, like you all know how to read. And I'm not trying to talk down to anybody in this program, but I think having a system for reading for research is going to help you out in the long run. I approached everything that I read when I was a beginning graduate student at Cal State San Marcos. I began everything that I read as if it was something I was going to analyze. So it took me way too long, and I'm still a very slow reader. It took me way too long to read things. So the suggestions this week, they're meant to help you out. So take advantage of that. So one of the things that we'll talk about this week is like how you annotate things for research. You're going to use things that you read to help you out with your study, and how do you take notes about that kind of stuff? That's what this week is going to dive into a fair bit. The readings in Blakesley and Fleischer are going to talk about that a fair bit. So there are suggestions about how to find sources, and I think that's all helpful things. How to use databases. They're all good ideas. In the supplemental resources folder for this week, I've included some links to SSU's database, CompPile, Google Scholar, some resources that were put together to help folks do research in our discipline. And I think that any of those would be super helpful. I also, some journals that aren't found in some of those databases that I think are important and good, I've also included them in the supplemental resources. So there's some help in trying to find research in our discipline. What I wanted to focus on in the reading and talk a little bit about here is the idea of taking notes when you're reading for research and you're preparing for a research project. One of the pieces of the midterm project is submitting a research journal of articles you've consulted for the first half of the semester. I'm going to ask you to try out a few note-taking methods in that research journal. This week I'd like you to read 2 articles. They can be adjacent, they should be in the ballpark of the topic that you're thinking about for your potential project. But I'd like you to read 2 articles, and I'd like you to try the research reading log approach that's discussed on page 28, and then the Brooks Notes entry approach, which is discussed on pages 51 and 52 of Blakesley and Fleischer. Try out those 2 note-taking methods and see what you think. For most of the research journal entries, you're going to be able to choose what kind of method you use, but there's some times where I want you to try out different things just to see if it works. By the midterm, you're going to need at least 15 total entries, and you'll be able to choose the note-taking method that you use for most of them. But again, this week I'd like you to try out those 2 methods. Another thing to keep in mind is that you'll need to submit your research journal for your midterm. So if you live far away, you might want to choose doing an electronic version. As we embark on reading for research this week, I think I might also like to make a plug for Zotero, which I think would be really helpful. If you haven't had class with me before, Zotero is an open source citation management system. It helps you build your own works cited pages. It has a plugin with Microsoft Word that allows you to cite things in APA, Chicago, MLA. It will build your works cited page for you, but it also helps you kind of keep track of all the research that you've done and all the notes that you've taken about the research that you've done. I'll post a video and some resources about Zotero in this week's supplemental resources page. One final note about what's due this week. You're reading pages 17 to 34 and then pages 51 to 52 of Blakesley and Fleischer. You're also responding to prompt 2.1 on pages 19 to 20 of the textbook, and you're going to take notes about a couple articles and try out a couple of the methods that are talked about in the reading for this week. One additional, and it's a minor task, but one additional task I'd like you to complete is to take a moment to look at the midterm project prompt. It'll be on Perusal. I'd like you to comment using Perusal, and I'd like your feedback before I finalize that prompt. So that's going to be available for you, and I'd like you to comment on Perusal, send me your feedback, let me know what questions you have, send me some notes, and I'll make some changes and finalize that prompt. I think that's all I wanted to share with you all about week 2 in Research Methods of Composition and Rhetoric. On Tuesday of week 2 at 5:30 p.m., I'll host a Teams meeting, and I'll make a link available to folks. I'll cover any questions that you might have. I'll check in with folks about potential research topics, just check in and see how you're doing. I know that there's a couple folks I haven't met yet. I'd love to meet you if possible. I'll ask you a little bit about your preliminary research topics, and if you need help finding sources and any of that kind of stuff. The meeting is not required, and if you can't make it, you'd still like to check in, email me and we'll find a time to chat, even if it's outside my office hours. I'd love to check in with you guys about your research. So that's all we have. I want to apologize for the awkwardness of the video. I'm recovering from COVID, and I'm like pausing every once in a while to like take sips of tea and try not to cough. So that's what's going on with me. I hope you all are doing well, and I'll talk to you all soon.